So I'd like to welcome everyone once again to the fifth session this spring in the series on agriculture, urbanism, and the countryside. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you. I have to say back in Zoom, let's say exercise, because of unexpected and sad, let's say, visa denial to our main speaker. But we will in any case have a great session and really make use of this recording and hopefully come back with all of you in person soon. So I just want to say thank you to my co-curators today, Nitin Batla, Nazlı Tümerdem, and Hans Hortig. Also thank you to Ayman Hayen for video editing after the session, and also to Evelyn Gordon for coordination. And to all participants, today with us is Sahar Qawsami, an architect, restorer, and co-founder with her partner and collaborator Nida Sinokrot of SAKIYA, a progressive academy for experimental knowledge production in Ramallah, Palestine, that brings together three fields, art, agriculture, and science, or in other words, local agrarian traditions of self-sufficiency in relation to contemporary art and ecological practices. So we are looking very much forward to that, and to discuss these themes with us. We have invited Adam Jasper, Stefanie Knobel, and Federico Luisetti. Thank you very much for joining, and you will be all introduced in a moment. So for all of you who are joining us for the first time, whether today or in the future watching this recording, I just want to say a few words about the sessions. We are in fact reflecting on the future of the discipline of urbanism, or what used to be known as urbanism. We see this field changing and developing, first of all, into a kind of bringing together a range of interconnected fields, from urban and landscape design to territorial design and research, and to various spatial practices, including urban activism and the arts. So we see a much more of a kind of interdisciplinary constellation consolidating, and we also see a kind of a extended geography of these practices, which involves a broadening of perspective from what used to be a kind of city-centric focus in the past to a discipline that will encompass perspective over wider territories, including, for example, operationalized landscapes, extractive hinterlands, and the so-called rural areas. Ultimately, a discipline that conceives the kind of urban as at the planetary scale, and over the past actually 7 years, these are some of the sessions that we ran, let's say, engaging with the range of themes and urgencies that address or are implicated in such, let's say, reconfigured the notion of urban and territorial design practice, research, and pedagogy, And those themes that we highlighted were, for example, neoliberal power and politics, or moving away from such, let's say, forces. We debated also ecologies under Anthropocene, or let's say post-Anthropocene, then technology beyond techno-fixing, and also, for example, politics of material flows and accumulations. And finally, we are back this spring to debate with all of you how vital agriculture has become to the urban debate today. And I would now invite my co-curator and also coordinator of our doctoral program, Nitin Batla, to tell you a few more words about the program this spring and to introduce today's session.
Thanks, Milica. So as Milica just mentioned, we're in the 7th iteration of the Sessions on Territory this time in this series. And we are looking at agriculture, and the aim of the program is to frame and explore critical agrarian questions which are emerging under this sort of 21st century explosion of extended urbanization. So among the themes that we're debating as a part of the current iteration include an exploration of alternatives to the global food regimes. So we're questioning, can we deindustrialize agricultural landscapes in the global north and decolonize the plantations of the global south? And the second sort of theme or question we're exploring is, can we re-examine the ways in which plants and animals are used in industrial food systems, and can we use technology in agriculture to support biodiversity? And a third theme or question perhaps is, we will argue, or like it's actually a theme, we will argue for relationships of care and reciprocity with soil and biodiversity to help move beyond intensive industrial models and towards agroecological and regenerative land practices. And this is where Sahar's contribution perhaps sits well. So as part of the ongoing lecture series, we've invited some of the leading academics and practitioners who are working at the confluence of urban, agrarian, and landscape studies and design. And some of the speakers we've had in the series so far include Raj Patel, Lenora Ditzler, Tamar Novik, and Christopher Roth, who was with us last week. So in today's session, we move towards exploring alternatives to intensive industrial models of agriculture. And what I will do is start by introducing the respondents. So our first respondent for today is Federico Luisetti. He's an associate professor of Italian culture and society at the University of St. Gallen, and his research interests lie in critical theory and environmental studies. His transdisciplinary collaborative research project, Unruly Typologies, at the University of St. Gallen, aims to encounter the socio-natural multi-layered domains, promote cross-disciplinary conversations, unsettle categories, and envision eco-political initiatives not aligned with neoliberal ecologies. Our second respondent, Stefanie Knobel, is a Swiss theater artist based in Zurich. Her interest lies in textile art, plant and human migration, and more than human past. Stefanie is exhibited at several prominent museums and art galleries and has received several prestigious art awards and residencies. And our third respondent, Adam Jasper, is a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute for History and Theory of Architecture at the ETH Zurich. He's the editor of the Architectural Theory Journal, GTA Papers, and regularly contributes to journals such as Cabinet Magazine and Art Forum, among others. Lastly, we have Faik Murray in the audience, who generously put us in touch with today's speaker, and today's session would have been impossible without his support. Faik is a doctoral fellow at the Institute of History and Theory of Architecture and works on the history of revolutionary commons in Palestine. So I would like to now briefly introduce our speaker for today, Sahar Qawsami. Sahar is a Palestinian architect, and she studied at the Beit University close to Ramallah, Palestine. She received a Fulbright scholarship in 2005 to study her MA in architecture at the Miami University, where she was awarded the American Institute of Architects Award in 2007. In 2016, together with Nida Sinokrot, who cannot join us today, Sahar co-founded SAKIYA Art, Science and Agriculture, a nomadic international interdisciplinary program to bridge fading local traditions of self-sufficiency with contemporary ecological practices. So SAKIYA's long-term approach maintains that through integrating farming and agrarian heritage into the fabric of contemporary arts and sciences, both sectors can be enriched, challenging the class divide between what can be seen as urban and rural areas. And this sort of class divide characterizes many cultural institutions in Palestine, and I would say most of the world. So we hope to learn more about Sahar and SAKIYA's work through the lecture today. And please join me in welcoming Sahar on the virtual stage. And it's such a pity that we couldn't have her in person today. So Sahar, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introductions. I'm very happy to be with you. Okay, I will start with this image from Ramallah. I will speak a little bit of background, and I'm going to talk a little bit about realities of labor in Palestine since the 1970s. So since a little bit after the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza and the Golan Heights in 1967. And a little bit about this picture. What you see in the foreground is a demolished house that would have been from the 50s or 60s, 1950s or 60s. And these houses are being demolished at a very high rate to make space for larger buildings as part of Ramallah's building boom that has been happening for the past 15 to 20 years. Since the 1970s, Palestinians in rural areas have shifted from working in agriculture to manual labor, service and building industry in Israeli projects, settlements, and factories. There are 100,000 documented workers from the West Bank in Israeli factories and projects. Many workers are undocumented, and they face threats of being captured and imprisoned. So the numbers are even greater. It's a lot more than 100,000 workers. Another major wave of Palestinians moving to Israeli building industry was in 2002, resulting from Israel's apartheid wall, separating villages from their arable lands and cities from their natural surroundings. This marks an increase in exodus to cities in search of work. So there has been a few waves of people leaving work in agriculture in the Palestinian highlands, which is the area, the middle area of the West Bank, to work mostly in building projects. Looking at these projects and these ideas of progress, colonization is rooted in what was presented as progressive ideas related to modernization. When settlers first came to Palestine, they saw what was, for them, a land without people. Although Palestinian cities were thriving, they saw a form of cultivation, a garden, that they had not heard the narrative of before. So they didn't recognize it, they didn't see it. They saw wilderness, they saw primitivism at the dawn of mechanized agriculture. So how can we unpack that? How can we reintroduce the narrative of the garden that is rewilded to question these assumptions that are made to service colonialism? Decolonization methodologies can navigate these anxieties, these questions. And these are our strategies at SAKIYA. We explore ways to unpack these questions in relation to our relationship to land and the practices of colonization. The loss of Palestinian land associated with the Israeli colonization is not only measured in lost area, but also in lost tradition, lost knowledge, and the loss of cooperation. Over the course of the past 2 decades, and now I'm going to talk about the Palestinian National Authority, And this is another picture of Ramallah, and you can see different buildings from different areas almost on top of each other. And this is the reality of the city today. And over the course of the past 2 decades, the rise of neoliberal economics in the West Bank in the form of mortgages and a booming property market, personal debt, and car loans have brought West Bank Palestinians into credit debit system in larger and larger numbers. Building and development patterns have reorganized the land and its social relations. So we have moved from the commons, what we call masha', the commons, to individually owned and privately maintained land. And this is what you will see mostly in these pictures. So part of what led to this is foreign aid. Foreign aid played a huge part in this change in the economy. Of course, there are so many different other factors, political and economics, but since we're in the cultural sector, we like to speak also about cultural funding. And this is what I want to speak about in this quote from Dr. Samia Butme. So despite the massive amounts of development aid that have been poured into the West Bank, there is still a stark contrast between the perceived improvement in the Palestinian economy and the actual standard of living for the majority of Palestinians. Development aid, which comprises roughly 40% of Palestine's GDP, has been complicit in obscuring economic reality and in some cases truncating Palestine's struggle for national liberation. And we ask at SAKIYA, we ask the question of how can we come up with a sustainable alternative to the highly consumerist reality, the destructive building practices, the alienation from nature and sense of community, and the culture of competition. Can we ask, does cultural funding create a culture of dependency? And I'm taking you now to SAKIYA in Ein Qiniya. And to the right of the screen, you see the edge of Ramallah, the west edge of Ramallah. And just a little bit of land designations here, according to Oslo agreement between Palestinians and Israelis, the land was divided into different categories. So area A is under Palestinian control, and area B is under civil Palestinian control, but under Israeli military control. And whatever doesn't have color, which is most of the area, is area C. And this is the case for most of the West Bank. So most of the West Bank is actually in area C, which is completely under Israeli control, under military control. And also it has the most common land. So most of the common land that we have between villages and cities lies within area C. In this purple color here, you can see 2 settlements. These are the closest settlements to Ein Qiniya in the middle, where we are located. And they are built on parts of the land of the Ein Qiniya village and the neighboring villages, so Deir Bzia and Al Janiya, but a lot of the lands of Ein Qiniya were confiscated for these settlements. The lands around it are off limits to Palestinians. So you can see, and maybe I can point, this valley here. And I'm gonna talk about these valleys, so it's important to point them out. So here's one valley, and here's another valley. And these valleys is where all of our water, of course, collects. They're very important ecological pockets. These areas create the lung for Ramallah. This is where all the clean air comes from, where all the water, clean water as well comes from. And they're very rich in biodiversity. This valley, Wadi ad-Dilab here, between the two settlements, is off limits to Palestinians. So in the past, where it was very active agriculture and social activities, it's today off limits. And in the past, I walked actually between the villages through this valley. SAKIYA is here, and it's in the village of Ein Qiniya, but it's 10-15 minutes of a walk. So we don't have a street. It's right embedded in the hill. So in search of an antidote to the neoliberal, alienating consumerist culture, and given the increasing number of disenfranchised youth in our refugee camps, rural and urban areas, Nida Sinukrat and I established SAKIYA, Art, Science, Agriculture, an interdisciplinary residency program with a mandate to bridge fading local traditions of self-sufficiency with contemporary ecological practices. SAKIYA is a progressive academy, residency program, research hub, farm, located in Ein Qiniya, a small agricultural village, only 7 kilometers west of Ramallah, and under, of course, full Israeli control, and with all the restrictions that entails. Our social fabric has been eroded, and as such, the rituals and celebrations that would accompany collective practices tied to the land have all but faded. And I'm talking about all of these lands and a lot of the activities that would have taken place here in the past. Individualism has supplanted commoning, a reality made possible by neoliberal notions of liberation and a culture of debt. But being in a village, we're lucky because the memory, the collective memory and knowledge of past practices is still there. We can hear it, we can see it. Even some children have some of that knowledge that they got from their mothers, parents and grandparents. So we're trying little by little to extract and unlearn some of the things that we learned in schools and relearn from being in the village and being in close contact with this site and with the village. And here you can see 2 houses. Here's one, and the other one is behind these trees. And these are our residency spaces and exhibition spaces, office spaces, and the entire site is embedded within this hill here with farmland and an old forest and a lot of different historic trees. What are the possibilities of emancipatory action under these conditions? And I'm talking about conditions where collective practices have faded, rituals and celebrations also almost disappeared, individualism takes over, and commoning is not practiced. Common land is not being managed anymore, and it's awaiting to be parcelized and sold. What are the possibilities of emancipatory action under these conditions? How can the garden be reclaimed from modernist notions of sustainability and private property and reimagined a site for anti-colonial, anti-capitalist action? Through engaging in collective projects rooted in indigenous agrarian practices, we are promoting counter-hegemonic notions of security, food, social, environmental security, as well as counter-hegemonic notions of sustainability that reject the supposition that sustainable technologies can solve the problem while maintaining the status quo. So we use sustainable technologies, of course, but we refuse or reject the supposition that this is the only way for a sustainable future. Our work takes the acts of reclaiming, rewilding, reimagining as its point of departure. Rewilding the soil from the ravages of monoculture agriculture and rewilding local knowledge cultures from colonialism and neoliberalism. SAKIYA offers a platform for envisioning new networks, systems, processes that can mediate new spatial and social configurations. More reclusive systems and circular modes of production are essential for imagined, emancipatory, socio-spatial politics and practices. This kind of cultivation takes hard work, and it's fundamentally creative and collaborative. And I'm going to start with working on the renovation of the house. This is the first thing we did as we came to SAKIYA. Our house had this house was abandoned since 1967. So since the Israeli occupation of this area in 1967, people who lived in it were kicked out, and it was vandalized after that. 5 big almond trees, you can see 2 of them here, were growing out of the walls. And being in Area C, this meant that if the walls collapsed and if the roofs collapsed, we were unable to rebuild it because building permits are not given to Palestinians in Area C. And how did the almond trees get there? Birds would pick almonds to eat them, and they would put them between 2 stones, and they would peck at them to open to eat what's the inside, and they would instead push it in the wall. And since the building is built with soil, the almond would grow into a tree. So we had 5 big trees within our buildings. So our approach really was to come together and explore ways to working in relation to the surrounding. And I worked in preservation for many years before coming to SAKIYA, and I noticed that we tend to do preservation in a way that makes a house look or seem like a museum. So we're really concerned about the stones and the house itself, but we give little attention to the surrounding or the social practices around it. And instead, we wanted this house to be an experiment. We wanted it to be a place where we come together and reevaluate common practices and bring about new common ways of working together. So we used, of course, mostly natural materials. We used mixes that were used by people in the past in the village. So people, as we worked, and because of this process, people in the village would come and they would share mixes with us. So it also became a place for sharing. This learning environment allowed a professional and students to come and be involved, also volunteers. We started in 2018, and it's almost done. It is, we just need to add, artists use it actually now, so it's usable right now. We just need to add a solar system and we'll be good. As we worked on the houses, we also worked, of course, all around them. We dug around to create paths for rainwater. And as we dug around, we discovered intricate systems of canals going across and parallel to each other. These systems connected the house to the well and to the water spring, and to a really sophisticated drainage system of rainwater. So all of these canals and all of these infrastructures, the hidden infrastructures, made us really question infrastructure today. And we started exploring different common social infrastructures and the relationship to the built infrastructure, how in the past infrastructures were built and managed by people. And so the resources were managed by people and they were celebrated by people. And so everybody had access to these resources. While today infrastructure is managed by either private companies or the state. And these infrastructures have to be paid for, which means that some people can get them and some people cannot. And so we started really looking at infrastructure as this important question in our work. And we started thinking about ephemeral infrastructures, these stories, these invisible forces that govern and mediate our relationship to the built environment and nature. And that is because when you have this strong relationship to these resources and you start thinking about managing and using and distributing, this relationship to these resources had to be governed through some sort of law. And we realized that these laws were brought together by these stories, and a lot of stories brought fictional characters or spirits. And so if you believe that the spring had a fictional, a spirit that protects it, then you would protect the spring because it has this holiness to it. So we started exploring all these stories about infrastructure. And we started thinking, why aren't mythologies similar to infrastructure? In that they govern and assuage our anxieties and offer forms of embodiment, collective labor, and celebration. In Palestine, whereas song and ritual might have accompanied collective labor, infrastructure has made that invisible and took away that need for collective participation. So we lose these stories in the way. So we started thinking about moving from these ephemeral infrastructures that are managed by people to these infrastructures that are taken away from us, hidden from us. How do we bring that back? How do we fertilize our imagination or recall narrative structures and alternatives to alienating infrastructures? So what happens when we do not remember these stories? And what happens when these stories have been erased by colonial expansion or genocide? And we think that this is the work of the artist, and this is the work that we are engaged in now. So perhaps there's a way to imagine between our experiences what little among some of these indigenous struggles in relationship to water. And you know, we're also looking at not just what happens in Palestine and these ways of commoning in Palestine, but we're also looking at other indigenous practices that happen elsewhere in the world, and we're learning from them. Our artists explore these issues, and I'll show you in a little bit. And part of the very important infrastructure that we engage in is our stone walls. So you can see that stone walls are, boulders and stone walls are very important because they hold water. So since the land has not so much soil, terracing was a very common practice and a very important practice to hold the soil, to create more soil, and to generate more land for cultivation. So I will talk a little bit about these stones. We spend a lot of time at SAKIYA erecting and repairing dry stack stone walls. They're called sanasil. The root for this word is the same as the necklace. It's like adorning the land with jewels of stone. But this is a dying art form. And we are fortunate to work with some really amazing builders in Ein Qiniya, and they started working with us, we started learning together from examples in the landscape, how dry built stone structures were built. And we started learning from their knowledge and stories that they have. Here you can see us rebuilding some of the stone walls. And this works, the most important thing about these infrastructures is maintenance. So these structures need maintenance yearly. And this happened historically in Palestine. Every year you would take care of your house, you would take care of the stone walls around it. And since people don't have that culture anymore, we see these stone walls eroding, and in the way we're losing our soil, losing good land for cultivation. And so we're losing our agricultural land. And well, when we build in this way, it's a very old way, using no tools, some tools, but not using any heavy tools or no mixes. We don't use cement, for example. A lot of people come and say, why don't you use some cement? And we have to explain that this is important because it regulates temperatures. It has crevices for animals and other insects and living things and wild plants. And we believe that maintenance is a beautiful part of working in the land and of working together. And so this idea of like always asking questions about why aren't we using cement is an example of how indigenous spatial memory also has been colonized. So this work has lost its value almost. But little by little, we have now a large number of young people in the village who are coming to learn actually this practice from the masters that we have on site. And we built this amazing little amphitheater that they built with huge boulders that they found around the site. And they called it after the village where they came from. So they were expelled in 1948 from a village called Barfilia. And they built this amphitheater and called it Barfilia Theater to commemorate their village. Here's more examples of these structures and infrastructures. And this, we've been doing this for years, and this will never end. This will be something that we always do. So another important part of what we do is, of course, what we call rewilding pedagogy. And it is our approach to the different projects where we bring symposia, exhibitions, summer schools, kitchen celebrations. We have a project called The Garden as Our Classroom, and in it, professors from different universities, locally and internationally, come to SAKIYA with their students to work on different subjects. And here we have NIDA students from MIT. This was in 2019. And then the pandemic hit and they couldn't come for the years later after. But this was their class on called Common Ground, and they had Sakiya as their site of investigation, and they worked with the experts and different people from Ein Qiniya and from Birzeit University, from Ramallah, from different cities around. They developed projects together with NIDA and our master builders on site. Just wanna go over some pictures here. And here, I wanted to show you also the result of the students' investigation, MIT students' investigation. I just took this one class. There are several other classes that took Sakiya as a site for investigation, but this was their project review for the end of the year. And some projects are actually being built at Sakiya right now. One of them is this toilet, which is a metabolic dry toilet, which rotates 360 and allows you views of the entire site. And this we will build next month. These are works by students from Birzeit University that they developed with their professor Amir Shomali, who's an artist and filmmaker. They made different inks, different, and this is a work of Samia Halabi, artist Samia Halabi. Using also soils. And this is in the upper house, which is our artist residency space after renovation, after we took out the different trees. So this is how it is today. And this house is being renovated to become another residency space and an office for Sakiya. And since we talked about the engagement of the artist, the importance of these sustainable methodologies and sustainable mythologies, I would like to speak about Jumana's work. So Jumana Emil Aboud is an artist who has been engaging on a project with us for the past year and a half. Jumana works on stories around springs, water springs. And so her with a number of students and people from the village went around and looked at tens of different springs all around Ein Qiniya. They collected their stories. They actually tried to find springs that are dry today. Like they tried to map everything they could about the different water springs from information that they found in maps, old maps, or different stories, mythology and spirits and other stories that are in the village or in different books. And they engage in live art performances and exercises and create new mythologies. So they create new stories around these water springs. So the relationship becomes a current relationship rather than a historic relationship that would only exist in a story. So it's a relationship between us today and the spring. And with this building this relationship between the different people that are looking for this water and the stories around these water, this is where we believe this responsibility comes to take care of these water springs, where we start thinking about how to bring them back to life, or how to take care of them, or how to manage them and use them sustainably. So this is like one group that has been engaged with us for a year and a half, and we have a few artists that do this with us. And of course, along the way, we learn about the different foods that wild foods that grow in the land, and we make so on every tour, on every walk, on every meeting, we make food from what happens to be in season. And so I talked about celebration, and this is what I think is the most important thing in common practices. I think after you work, you have to celebrate, and this is very important to Sakya. So we give celebration a high importance, and we invite everybody in the village to come to celebrate with us. And these are just some pictures. And here's our pool and water spring after we renovated them. And they're used for swimming as well. And if I have time, I'm not sure, I can speak about this one more project, but if I don't, I can stop here.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So I wanted to talk about this project because it takes me back to the valleys that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation when I showed you the two valleys that connect Ein Qiniya with Ramallah. And I want to speak a little bit about the future of these valleys. So in the space of 8 days in the late summer, this summer, in September of this summer, we will have a forum that would take place in the form of exhibited imaginaries, art performances, film screenings, and discussions. And we'll have a symposium to speak about these, the expansion of Ramallah. What's happening today is that Ramallah is expanding towards the west into Ein Qiniya because Ramallah is surrounded by either the separation wall or settlements, and the only expansion is towards Ein Qiniya. And that means that there's a lot of speculation of the land of Ein Qiniya, that some land would turn from Area C to Area A through negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis, and then the city would expand towards Ein Qiniya, and it would destroy most of the land, of the agricultural land, and of course the valleys. And here I'm showing you like one edge of the city, and this is how the edge looks, you know, like junkyards, etc. A lot of dumping of construction site dumps, and these are usually dumped where roads are going to be open. And so the two valleys that I mentioned at the beginning are planned according to the city of municipality of Ramallah to become two big roads that connect Ramallah to the surrounding areas through a ring road to eliminate traffic. And the valleys today look like this, but unfortunately, this water is mostly contaminated by sewage water. So the sewage treatment facility of Ramallah dumps the sewage into the valleys before treating it or half treated. And so these valleys, where parts of them are off limits to Palestinians because they're between the settlements, the other part is under future speculation to become a road. And so the city already either dumps construction rubble in it or dumps the sewage water in it. And this is also sewage water where historically people would hang out and picnic. So we worked with Urbana, Natasha Aruri, since 2018 on a project that looks at the valleys and Sakiya and the village in relation to Ramallah. And we developed 20 master plans with the women in the village. This is one example of one master plan that we drew with the women. And so this took years of working. We started with different imagination sessions and mind mapping, and then we worked on every detail with each woman, and each one is different. And we are planning in the summer, in the late summer, to bring attention to these different plans to the municipality of Ramallah to speak about different ways of looking at the expansion and the different relationship with the village of Ein Qiniya, and also to basically say that the protection of the valleys is very important, and we need to keep them, the valleys need to be off limits to construction, and construction can happen around, and that we can speak about this construction. So we will have symposiums that discuss different potential ways of expanding the city without destroying our natural resources and natural sites. So this is the last project I wanted to share with you, and I can end here.
Thank you so much, Sahar. It was really amazing, and I took a lot of notes, and I'm really kind of impressed by the clarity of the picture and the kind of everyday concepts that we use, like infrastructure, and with what, you know, they come with this sort of a deep clarity, let's say, in your presentation. So this kind of direct engagement in the you know, in the residency, and the kind of work that you managed to mobilize is wonderful. Also the work with stone walls, and it's wonderful. And this also the kind of notion of mythology and the new mythology. So many interesting layers that you bring in. And I just wanted to ask you for a kind of clarification of the context, a few words additionally around well, the history of the landscape. So these, let's say, these layers like stone walls and these you know, this sort of rainwater infrastructures, and these, let's say, swales and terraces. I mean, what you know, historically, what are we, you know, where do you trace back this landscape, or are there different layers to it? So this is one question. And the other question I would like to ask you is also around the actual residency. And you said that it was actually abandoned, and it's in a Israeli controlled territory, abandoned since 1961. So how did you actually return to it, you know, just purely let's say legally, or you know, how did the opportunity open up, and you know, in what kind of status are you currently, let's say, in terms of property, you know, and are you able to in one way or the other play or let's say enter with the sort of notion of the commons into the actual legal sphere, you know? Let's say I imagine this is difficult, but I'm just curious. So let's say at least these two questions, just to get a sense of the context a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you. So the history of the hill, we know that there is Roman archaeology on the hill, and we know that there is also Crusader archaeology and Ayyubid archaeology. So we have things from thousands of years, 2,000 years, probably older. And but we know the house that I showed you that is used as a residency, the base of it is from the Crusader times, and it's 1,000 years old. A little less than 1,000, but almost 1,000 years old. And that's the history goes back to the a site that the Crusades built a lot around water springs. So around water springs, they built these like towers to protect water sites. And that's the origin of our house. And these canals were probably from that time, maybe before, but for sure people used them long after and maintained them long after. And so because of this continuous maintaining of infrastructures, it's hard to say exactly when they were built, but we suspect that they're from the history of the house. So at least 1,000 years old. Legally, so the house and the lands around it is owned by the Zalatimo family from Jerusalem. So it's privately owned, but most of the land is privately owned, even if it's masha', so it's privately owned, but among hundreds of people. But when it's in Area C, really what is in control is the Israeli law. But since it's your land, it depends. It's really very site specific. So each case in Palestine, each person in Palestine is a different case. Like when it comes to Israeli regulations, each one of us has different ways of going around their legal status. So this land is an Area C. Legally, it's with the Israelis, so we cannot build and change anything. They come, they walk, they have a trail actually that they walk through. We're not allowed to build more things. And they have not stopped us from working. There are so many sites around, and you hear probably maybe in the news about sites, different sites where people try to go back to their land and the Israelis push them out or kick them out, or the settlers come and burn their olive trees, etc. And this happens everywhere. This didn't happen where we are. So maybe it's just our luck, but we are lucky to be there now, and this could change. So legally, the Israelis could bring new laws to the area, and we could lose access, but this has not happened to us yet. So we're there, and we think that by being there and by maintaining a presence and working, we're actually making it harder for them to claim any right to it. So yeah, this is the case.
Thank you very much. We are. I would invite actually any of our guests to jump in, or perhaps Nazlı or Nitin or Faik, if you'd like. We are in Zoom, so I'm not seeing right now if anybody has a raised hand. Oh, Adam, I see it. Okay, great.
Yes, Sahar, thank you for this wonderful talk and these beautiful images. I had two questions, and you could really take either of them. You don't have to take both. But one of them is more about the situation in the city. And I was thinking about the extremely widely cited article of Abdulmalik Simon, who I believe was Nitin, someone Nitin knows quite well as Milica, in which he argues that based on Johannesburg, that in many cities that would otherwise have their social relations broken apart by neoliberalism, what you see is an infrastructure made of individual relationships, a kind of infrastructure of people. And I wanted to ask if that description resonated with what you're seeing yourself in Ramallah and in the local community. And the other question, and this is an entirely different one, so really it's a choice, but it was about the stories around the springs, because you said you had a very long collaboration with an artist who was deeply investigating the myths around the water sources. And I remembered from reading I read about the only translation of the book The Golden Bough by James George Fraser into Arabic, and it was by Jabra Ibrahim Jabra, the much loved exiled writer. And he also seems to lavish particular attention on the passages around springs. And I wanted to ask if if those, what sort of myths you were looking at, and what sort of sources you were using, and to just tell us a little bit about those sites.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, somebody shared the article, so I'll look at it. Infrastructure of people, I really like that. I think that I am very hopeful, but I am a hopeful person naturally. So I see that this reality of colonization and neoliberalism, and both of them really silencing dissent, really acting very violently against any ideas that would challenge their presence. I see that there is so much work that has been done with younger generations. So I see it, and sometimes it happens around Sakiya, and I feel like we're lucky because Sakiya, this like place on the edge where things can happen and not be exactly under the radar. And so I see these different groups and different people that come together and do different things. So for example, there are a few groups that I know and we're close and we work with that do, for example, agriculture on the periphery of their villages and cities around Ramallah. And so these people who, you know, come from different backgrounds, most of them are university educated. They decide to take this little piece of land, sometimes inside the city, sometimes on the periphery, and do agricultural projects and try to sell their produce. And we are trying to make a network of these different groups. And so I don't know if that sounds like what infrastructure of people would be like, but yes, and that's why things are hopeful, because otherwise it's really a very dark reality of what's happening in Palestine. I mean, there's like colonization that there's no end to it, it seems like, and then there's a neoliberal system that doesn't even allow us to think about liberation. And yeah, so that really resonates, and thank you so much. I will definitely check it out. And for the stories, I don't want to speak for Jumana Emil Aboud, but for sure they read Tawfiq Kanaan. And Tawfiq is this amazing doctor who was working in Palestine. He was living in Bijala near Bethlehem, working as a doctor, and he would have, it was in the early 1900s, so that he would have people come to him for treatment. They would be wearing the and I forgot the name now, but talismans and the different things that protect people believed protect them. And so he would collect these things and give them treatment for free. So this was his payment. And so he collected a bunch of these stories and talismans. And he also did so much research about holy shrines, holy springs. He wrote a lot of material, and that's, I think, our most important resource when it comes to these stories. There's also the stories that are in the village that people tell from what they heard from their ancestors, and they're still alive with so many people, and which is incredible. So yeah, mostly local, some stories not even written anywhere, which is really amazing, and we're happy to write them down. And I would like to say that Jumana's project will be, or it is presented at Castle in Documenta. So if any of you is going there, you can also see Jumana's work at Sakiya in Castle.
Thank you so much. How do we find, or how do you spell the name Tawfiq Kanaan?
Tawfiq Kanaan, I'll write it in the chat.
That would be great, because he sounds like someone we should be reading.
He's amazing. I'm sure Fayet knows him, so Fayet should be there, right?
Yeah, hi. I have his book on my desk too.
Yes.
Okay, so he has the book as well. And there's different spellings, so I'm gonna
you write it.
So there's a couple of questions in the chat about it. I can see people are curious.
oh, okay.
Okay. Sahar, I'll deal with the book. You can take the next question if you want.
Should I read them? Oh, here we go.
Maybe Stephanie or Federico, you could perhaps go in with your questions if you like. Steph, yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for this very tremendously intense and nice lecture, Sahar. I really was like going within every word with you. And I also really very much liked this quote of you that we are not building the house there, but we are building the environment with the house. And it made so much sense with all of that, what followed after that you're really doing that. And I'm just a bit like asking a different question, because first of all, you gave an introduction into that 40% of the foreign GDP in Palestine is actually development money. And now I'm just asking how this kind of part comes into the infrastructure of storytelling, of mythologies, of histories. So how are actually storytelling and counter stories coming together, and how this kind of very complex network of power relations is actually becomes visible in a way also for, I imagine, people in the village who go there to help you to, or who are kind of participating in the community, how it is effectively going with this. And
yeah, so this culture of funding has broadened the gap in Palestine. So there's a larger gap today between city and village, between educated and not educated, between rich and poor. It's still middle class, it's still mostly middle class, but still this has broadened this gap. And so people feel it. This development aid has brought a lot of mistrust also to the Palestinian Authority, because people see how the money has been used to advance certain people's narratives, certain people's projects, certain ways of life, not everybody. And so people in refugee camps and in rural areas feel like they got the short end of the stick. They don't get a lot of benefit from whatever aid is coming to the Palestinian Authority and funneled through the Palestinian Authority. I mean, you know, the Palestinian Authority, it's not a secret that it's corrupt and dysfunctional, but, you know, people also see it and recognize it. And so they had these feelings of mistrust and disenfranchisement get bigger in rural areas and in marginalized areas. And so when we work in such areas, it takes a little bit more work to gain their trust, because they have witnessed unjust ways of working around them that has been happening for the past at least 20, 30 years. And so this trust came as we went. It took time. I have been hiking to that site since more than 20 years. And I have friends here and there. And when I first went to the village with a project, I remember my friends coming with me and telling people that, you know, like, Sahar is one of us. You know, she's one of us. We know her. She's a friend. Because, of course, people would come with this mistrust because of how projects have been happening all around the West Bank, where some people benefit and most people don't. But yeah, and you asked, I think, about, and of course, today it's different. I think I believe, and I hope that's the reality, that most people in the village are really happy about this project. So they feel like, you know, they feel like it's good for them. But you asked also about how this funding comes into the stories, and that's a really interesting question. So how do we tell these stories with this reality today? And that's I really like that question, and I'm not sure how, but I think that it comes through our new us. Like, I don't know what this new culture did to us. I'm sure unconsciously it comes through, but that's a question I want to dwell on and maybe come back to you with the answers later.
Yes, and I don't know if I can ask a question as well, or if anybody else is ready.
Sure, go ahead, Federico.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Sahar. This was really fascinating and inspiring as well. And, you know, I only spent one day in Ramallah 3 years ago, and I kept thinking that, you know, if you want to understand neoliberal capitalism, it's better if you look at Palestine. And that, if you want to understand Italy, you have to travel around Sicily, as Leonardo Sciascia, a Sicilian intellectual, was telling us. So in this context, I was particularly seduced by your idea of rebuilding, reinventing symbolic and material infrastructures at the same time. So I see those as forms of counter-subjectivation, as an attempt to resist what I would call the neoliberal state of nature. I don't know if you may agree with this definition, but you know what neoliberalism is doing across the world, and you see it in an exacerbated form in Palestine, is, you know, it's producing its own form of subjectivation. It's producing eco-citizens on one side, but on the other side, it's producing surplus people. It's creating what I would call a crisis of presence, to which we have to respond with other forms of subjectivations. And I was thinking of Ernesto De Martino, the Italian anthropologist, that saw rituals as an attempt to respond to this crisis of presence, to these forces of dispossession. So I come to the question. I noticed that you also try, or somehow make some compromise with the language of global sustainability, circularity, rewilding, sustainability, and so on. So my question is, how can you make sure that, you know, your symbolic infrastructure and your material infrastructure are not captured again by this perverse mechanism of neoliberal subjectivation that, as we know, also work, and you were just describing that, also work in particular through developmental aid, through NGOs, to this global paradigm that are absorbing constantly any alternative to its state of nature.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, very important. Yes, we use these words, and we have so many discussions, because you mentioned these words like rewilding, all very problematic, right? Rewilding, sustainability, and else. So we use these words, and we understand the problematics of them, and we try to give them the meaning that comes from working around them and understanding. And so, yeah, going back, you know, we live in a place where greenwashing happens all the time. Like, Israel pretends to do ecological projects, or claims to do ecological projects, that the only goal is to keep Palestinians off or to take Palestinian lands. So we understand this reality, and we understand how also neoliberal politics takes over every aspect of every green new thing that comes about. So our approach really is the same with all of these. I mean, how we come to these words and how we come to this different understandings from preservation and what it means, to law and what it means, infrastructure, ritual, mythology, methodology, it comes through working. And so we never really sit down and try to contemplate an idea without actually working on it. The thought comes after the work. And that's how we keep saying that this is going to be okay because this is what needs to be done. And we're doing the work and then thinking about what words to put on it. While neoliberal politics, you know, it comes ready with its ideas. And so I think our approach is different, and we're hoping that this would allow us always to stay true to what needs to be done, to stay true to the needs not only of the people, but also of the land, like what actually needs to happen in the land. We're very sensitive, and it is nice to also hear what you said, to keep reminding ourselves that this happens all the time and that we need to stay aware. But yeah, we're just, we go with what needs to be done, and we really we hardly have plans, and funders have a problem with us because we don't have a plan. We always the plan comes as we go, and you know, it's not favorable, but we don't work with how capitalist neoliberal people expect us to work. It's painful for them to watch us, actually.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have a question, perhaps as another intermission. Again, I'm curious to understand a little bit more about the context. So in this area, which is actually in the kind of a region of Ramallah, right? We are close to Ramallah. I'm wondering about the village and the local residents and the kind of, let's say, the kind of, let's say, perhaps if we could call it a kind of a pressures, economic, political, in the families, right? In the kind of organization of households, in the working the land, right? So do you see, I mean, for instance, in let's say large parts of Europe where we looked at, I mean, you know, we see the kind of depopulation on rural land as a consequence of, you know, migration to the cities, or there is the kind of counter pressure in the sense that there is you know, sort of real estate pressure, you know, to build an agricultural land. So what do you actually see as the kind of as the kind of basically the you know, the forces of let's say urbanization, you know, at work as a consequence of, let's say, you know, state action, foreign aid, and all these influences that you mentioned. So what is actually happening with the households in the village around SAKIYA?
Yeah. So a lot of the people in the village work in Israeli projects, and that is the case all around the West Bank. So a lot of people, especially from villages, work in Israeli projects because they don't work in the land anymore. So this relationship to the land has been disconnected or lost. The village still has a few families that cultivate, that live off of the land. And these families, we work with them very closely. And as I said, we worked with a group of people on bringing back the artistry and craftsmanship of stone walls. And a lot of young men are coming to learn that craft. So instead of, we believe that we helped a tiny bit, instead of these young men, a few of them, going to find in Israeli projects, they're coming to learn how to build stone walls. And it's hard work. So that's a success story for us. But yes, the village, because it is in an area with very high speculation, most of the land is actually owned by investors and not by the people in the village. And so people don't have access to agricultural land. And what we did is that we offered land. We said we want to work with the farmers in the village to create the farm at SAKIYA, and that's what we did. We worked with one family to establish a farm at SAKIYA, where our food comes from, actually. And another problem is that the valley where the sewage today is being dumped and where the street is going to be built, that all around it was agricultural land, and today that's not possible because of the sewage. And so we have the powers from both sides, of Palestinian and Israeli, coming against this lifestyle or way of life that is dependent on agriculture, let alone that agriculture has been really difficult to practice because you have huge industrial farms, Israeli industrial farms, that flood the Palestinian market with really cheap products, and the Palestinians cannot compete, and there's no subsidies for Palestinian farmers, and so they're unable to really make any profit out of their products. So it's a really hard reality for Palestinian farmers. It's really incredibly challenging to be a farmer in Palestine, and it's really sad. But yeah, we're trying to work with as many families as possible in the village, and we work with at least a few families. We work also with a bunch of women. So whenever we have events, women do make the food for us. So all our food comes from the village, and so we try whenever it's possible to support the work of the people in the village. And yeah, but it's a dire reality, and yeah, there's not enough projects in the village to support the people in the village, and so a lot of them go to Israeli projects, and a lot of them, of course, go to construction projects in Ramallah as well.
Yeah, it's very clear, and we see the kind of similar scenario in different parts of the world, and it's very, very important to bring this sense of let's say commoning or strengthening of these sort of local let's say communities and resources, and it's very hard to recapture them, no? So I think that kind of is a really interesting effort that we can sort of learn from each other, let's say, or establish a sort of a conversation in learning from different cases because of the projects that or I think we have parallel efforts in different places, and one of them is Santiago, actually, who is working in Colombia with the indigenous Inga, and he has his hand raised. Would you like to continue, Santiago?
Sure. Thank you so much, Sahar, for your presentation. I was really engaged, especially when you were presenting at the beginning, the photographs of the context of the mountain of the house, in the sense that it sort of played a lot with my preconceptions of Palestine. And it made me realize that Palestine is a space that is sort of very present in the media, let's say globally, for many people around the world. So that means that it generates a lot of stereotypes and preconceptions in people like me that are from far away. I actually am from Ecuador. And so I can imagine that contrasts or that is one of the reasons why there must be some conflict when you talk about foreign aid. And I was very surprised when you mentioned 40% of the GDP comes from foreign aid, because foreign aid is actually could be full of this stereotypes and preconceptions that collide with the cultural particularities that you're talking about in your presentation. So I would like to know, you seem to be one of these people that are in between worlds that connect sort of the really local realities to what is happening, what is coming from abroad. And I would like to know, what is your position, or how do you relate with your practice to this sort of connecting of worlds, especially as you were mentioning that there's so much foreign aid involving? And have you found any strategies to deal in a constructive way with this foreign aid that is coming to Palestine for the reasons that we many of us know? So yeah, I would like to ask you about that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, yeah, foreign aid is a huge problem. I think that was a quote from a few years ago. So I think today it's less than that, because other things happened, like with Corona pandemic, some budget cuts happened, or some international funding cuts happened, and with also a lot of different other crises in the region. I think a lot of money has been going to different places, but Palestine is still a place that receives a lot of foreign aid. So most of this foreign aid comes through the Palestinian Authority, and you know, sometimes you see it, sometimes you're unsure how this money is used. But also with the Palestinian Authority, they respond exactly to funder expectations, and so funders have conditional ways to give Palestinians, and this is a very big problem for us. For example, the European Union just brought in new conditions to funding to Palestinians, and because of this funding, every other cultural institution that I know of stopped applying for money from the European Union, because the conditions criminalize Palestinian struggles for liberation, or Palestinian struggle and resistance for liberation. And so we're unable to accept these conditions, and so we're unable to apply and get this foreign money. And so the money goes then to mostly the Palestinian Authority, that uses it not very wisely and not very justly. And so, yes, there is here the complicit, you know, like the funders being complicit with the problems of Palestine and truncating the liberation dream. Because when we speak about liberation, then we need to be listened to and what we think this liberation takes us, or this idea of liberation takes us. And we feel like with these conditions, there comes this assumption that you spoke about, this assumption of a stereotype of an idea about what Palestinians do and what they should do. So what maybe a Palestinian that deserves foreign aid would be like, you know, like a Palestinian who doesn't maybe resist the occupation, who doesn't dream of liberation, who would be happy with the status quo, who would engage with different cultural projects that are not looking towards an end for the problematic reality of life here. And so yes, and that's why we face really difficult situation getting. We only get money if it's not under any conditions, and we're very clear about our work and where we come from and how we're going to use it. And we have some funders that are very happy to work with us. So we worked with the Qattan Foundation in Ramallah, who actually helped us establish SAKIYA. And We got support from the French Institute and the Goethe Institute in Ramallah as well, who are very close, and they come to visit us and they know our work. And so we establish these relationships. This funding comes through a relationship, and it comes more as a partnership rather than a funder. So a lot of people who support us believe in our work. It makes it harder for us to get funding, but it makes it easier also for us to work knowing that we have this relationship with the funder. We're not going to be questioned on the basis of what we're doing or where we're going with the project. And you asked about my role, I think, but maybe I didn't answer that. And I'm not sure. I think that, through SAKIYA, we have been able to speak to so many people around the world. And we believe that being connected to a global network of commons in the world, people working with indigenous people all around the world, this is really important. We know that we work in a very specific site and a very small area with very, specific political reality, but we understand that that the problems are international, global. I mean, we all face similar problems everywhere from different powers, from different, like capitalism and colonialism works everywhere. Patriarchy, it's working everywhere. Like people are losing their indigenous lands everywhere in the world, and so we have been connecting and speaking with people who have been doing great work all around the world, and I think that's where we feel also a great value of what we're doing. That this is important because we can't speak about ecology without speaking about other people's struggles. We can't speak about Palestinian liberation without speaking about other people's liberation as well. Thanks.
Faik, please go ahead. I mean, I see your hand raised, so
yeah, thank you.
Please interrupt me if somebody else is also in the line.
No, it has been wonderful listening to all the input and the questions. Sahar, it's wonderful having you. I'm not really a respondent, so I'm going to ask quite a specific question. I'm interested in something you touched upon briefly, which is land rights or land ownership in Ein Qiniya and its relationship to the commons. So my question to you is, what are the commons exactly in Ein Qiniya? What constitutes them? And specifically in relation to land ownership across the years? Like, can you walk us through the different commons of the village and the land rights for them, and if that changed, for example, when the British came and surveyed Palestine, or later when the Jordanians did the same, and now with the Palestinian Authority, and maybe even before that with the Ottomans. If you know about the specific area that you're working on, the commons in relationship to ownership and that history.
Thanks, Faya. I know a little bit, and Ein Qiniya is also specific in that sense. So you probably know, and so the commons in Palestine, which was most of the land all over Palestine, started to be regulated through the Ottomans. So the late Ottoman period, the Ottomans were going through this modernization process. They wanted to modernize the land laws, and they established land registration. And so people were asked to register their lands through the state, and a lot of people refused to do that. For example, a lot of Bedouins refused to register lands because they believed that land is not something that you own. Like this idea of land ownership was foreign. But this happened anyway. It happened sometimes by force. It happened sometimes people didn't register the land because they didn't want to pay the tax. So even if it was theirs, they didn't register it. other people registered. And so you had this, like, it was a mess of land registration, but still most of the land stayed within commons, and the common is held for each village. The commons is held by the village, and it's rotated through the village. With the British mandate, of course, more land registration started. And when we talk about commons today, most of it is land owned by families. So it's not land that's owned by an entire village, because that has been divided so much over the years. But we have, for example, the Zalatimo land. In 1932, they bought the land. It was one person, but today it's maybe 100 people. So it becomes some sort of common today. And with Ein Qiniya, most of the land was owned by people from Ramallah, actually, not from Ein Qiniya. A lot of the people in Ein Qiniya are refugees who came from a village called Barfilia in 1948. And so for some reason in the past, these lands were owned by people from Ramallah, and a lot of people from Ramallah started land division and parcelization with the coming of the PA. So with the PA, a lot of this land law was established, and land started becoming really expensive because you could now invest on it. It became in Palestinian land, Palestinian areas. You could invest, you could build. And so prices went high. People were interested in selling. So people were not interested in the commons anymore. They started dividing lands. There was a huge process of communicating with people and dividing them. Many lawyers, many investors. Most of the land in Ein Qiniya today is owned by investors. That's the reality. The land we're on is owned by the Zalatimo family, but because it's owned by maybe 100 people who inherited the land, it acts like a masha', and we use it like a masha'. And I think that there is a possibility of using land like a masha', that even if it's not a masha', especially in Area C, since it is under Israeli control, and only by us coming together can we really challenge this reality of claimed security for the Israelis. So yeah, I don't know if I answered, but yeah, the land in Ein Qiniya today is mostly owned by investors, and this is why it's really important to speak to the municipality and speak about ways to expand the city of Ramallah towards Ein Qiniya, to think about better ecological maybe ways to do it, because otherwise Ein Qiniya is going to be completely swallowed by whatever Ramallah expansion looks like. And we know it doesn't look good, and it's not good.
I definitely agree with you that land ownership as a technicality should not be, let's say, a hindrance to envisioning it or using it as a commons, because the reality now is that most land is privately owned in Palestine. And so I agree with you certainly on that. But to go back a little bit to the question, for example, the water sources in the village, have they been owned collectively, or have they been used as a common, even though they were held, as private property? For example, the water spring on your land or on the Zalatimo land or something else. Are there, let's say, practices of common use which kind of diverge from the private ownership of the land or the resource?
Yes, so water springs in the village are held collectively and are used collectively, according to old rules around who's around the water spring. So if you have land that touches around the water spring, you have a right to it. But the village has been, I see practices in the village that are really incredible. For example, like some people get their house water from the springs. They don't get it from the city, which is really amazing. And people don't say, like, why do you get it from the village, from the spring, and I get it from the city and I have to pay for it and you don't have to pay for it. I feel like these things are a bit relaxed in the village. So yes, water springs are held in common. our spring, although it's in a privately owned land, it is common. So we have every day more than 500 goats that comes through the land to drink twice. Like they go and drink and they come back and they drink from it. So we have shepherds, and a number of shepherds who come with their goats every day. And at the beginning, they were afraid that by us coming to the land, that we would like claim the ownership of the land and say this is a private ownership. You can't use it to water your goats, and we didn't. And so we used it collectively, and this is an important important question, Faya, because other springs have been developed. So what happens is that a lot of groups come and like they develop, they rehabilitate. I don't know what the terms they use, but they cover the spring. So the spring becomes closed like a big tank. And then sheep and boars and gazelles and birds don't drink from it. And we decided that this is not just a common water for everybody in the village, but also for all the animals, the wild animals and the goats and the donkeys and everybody. And so we kept it open, and we had many water engineers that come to help us with the water, say, you need to close it, it's better if you close it, and we refuse to do that. And so I think that we need to I'm sure that this is not something that it's just we do. I think a lot of people also understand these realities, but I think that when the expert comes and they tell you what to do, I think sometimes you are keen to listen to the experts and you forget your common sense or your ancestral story and relationship, and that's what we're trying to navigate here. We understand the experts and we want to work with them, but we also have our relationship, and this is a very interesting place to navigate all the time.
We have Adam and then Amin, and maybe we are close to the end of our, let's say, official time. So just let us know by raising the hand. It's a fascinating discussion. Oh, Nazlı, did I see your hand? Okay, well then let's do it like that. Adam, Amin, Nazlı.
I have a very quick question. It's just actually a follow-up to what you were just discussing. You mentioned that when you were doing the first renovations, you came across an intricate network of agricultural canals, which made me, of course, think of the Kanat networks or the many different kinds of techniques or technologies for managing water. You also said that the water, at least recently, has been in common ownership. Do you know, are there other local models, such as like timed ownership of water or ownership based on the width of the canal? Are there other techniques that might have previously been used at your site for declaring water rights?
Yeah, so we have the time sharing thing with one of the springs, and we have the other spring that we manage completely on our own. And actually the part that we have in the other spring, we give to the Bedouins. There's a Bedouin community that live in the valley where the water is today contaminated by the sewage. And so that portion, because we don't need it, because we have another water, we give them our timeshare. So yes, there is different ways. There was it was such an amazing system where there were like certain people who do certain things, like the Kanawati or the Sakka, or like these people were highly respected in the community. They were highly trusted, and they had their job was to navigate these different rights and these different times, and we're learning about these different systems, and they exist everywhere in West Bank, and in some places they're still active and they're practiced, like in Battir in the south, in Bethlehem area. Our canals are like very small canals that connected the house to the spring and connected the spring to the well, and the house to the and the back of the house to the outside to drain the different water, the rainwater. So yeah, it was this amazing, incredible system, but it was a small system, and the larger systems exist in elsewhere in the village. So in the valley, because lots of different families were along the valley, were living along the valley, the system there was different, and the canals, you can see little bits and parts that are still there. You can see also an old mill that used the water. It's in ruin today. And so you can see the different production and the different economy and the different commons that happened along the spring in the valley. You can see it also in the neighboring village of Ein Qiniya. You can still see the different doors that open and close for the different lands. It's everywhere, all over the West Bank. It's something we're losing very, very quickly. I think it would be incredible if somebody just goes around and tries to archive, document all of these different amazing ways of dealing with water. Like, it's really fascinating how people had these amazing systems, and they're beautiful as well. Like, you see the water. And one important, actually, before I end about this, one important thing, the city of Jericho, before foreign aid, because we're speaking about foreign aid, Jericho is rich with water. It's like in the desert, the lowest point on earth. It has so much water. And as children, I remember there was canals all around. Next, like every sidewalk had canals running. Every house had a canal. You would walk and there's canals, and it's really, really hot. And so these canals were amazing. You would jump in it. You would splash yourself. Birds would drink from it. And then foreign aid came, and they closed off the big spring, and they completely took out the canals, because it was a place where water would evaporate or be misused, or, you know, and we lost all of that. So the entire city lost its form and shape, and actually and space. So it was a completely different, it looks completely different to me. At least I lived it, but younger people don't know it. But Jericho was this incredible city with all canals around it. But yeah, foreign aid and experts do that sometimes.
I can believe it. Thank you so much for this talk.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I propose actually, Amin, Nima, and Nazlı maybe to take 3 questions together and make that as a kind of a final round.
There's Amin and Nima, I think.
Yes, and Nazlı also.
And Nazlı.
Hi, I'll make it quick. First of all, just I want to thank you for this wonderful and inspiring presentation. And I had kind of a specific question to the issue of maintenance and the idea of the limitations that you might have in the landscape pertaining to how the areas are divided. So I was wondering if your network would have to be limited to the village, or would people in the city, for example, in Ramallah, would be able to participate in the construction of these projects, such as the terracing and the amphitheater and these small-scale structures? And also, I had a question regarding the permits in that regard, and if these structures somehow allow you to bypass these issues of limitations of what indigenous people and the Palestinians are capable of doing in the commons and constructing. If the wall, for example, then is kind of flies under that radar. And I would ask you also for if this information of how the mapping and the stories, the ephemera infrastructures you've mentioned, if they're available online as well as a sort of something for us to access. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Amin. Access, yes, so the village is accessible to people in Ramallah. Birzeit University is very close by, also the Arab American University. So we have people from Jerusalem come, people from all over the West Bank can come to Ein Qiniya. And so despite the difficulty with transportation and sometimes checkpoints, people from all over the West Bank come to Ein Qiniya, especially people from Ramallah and from Birzeit University. So that's been good. We had times in the past where villages and cities were completely cut off, but this is not the case right now, at least. It happens every now and then for different reasons, but yeah, in general, there's access. And because we're in Area C, we're very lucky to have these two buildings. Otherwise, would not have been able to build anything. In Area C, you're not allowed to build anything with a roof. And people have been, or a permanent roof. So people have been very creative in finding ways. And this is also for architects and architecture students. It's very interesting to look at ways the Palestinians navigate these realities of how do you build in Area C. And there's so many amazing examples. So, like in one village, I remember in the south, people would have their tent, and then inside the tent, they would build the house. So it looks like a tent from outside, but it's actually a house from inside. And there's different things where, there's so many different examples. So maybe we would have had to do something like that. And maybe that's a really nice creative exercise for us. But yeah, we're lucky to have these buildings. And the material will be available online. It's, because we work with artists, it's also the property of the artists. And so we provide what the artist would like to provide, but we're working on this archive as well with Jumana. We're a little slow because we're very few, but yeah, it will happen. Thank you.
Maybe we can take Nazlı and Nima's questions together.
Yes. Hi, Sahar. And I can maybe emphasize again that we are really sad that you're not here, because it seems like the conversation would continue in a very meaningful way. But I was really fascinated by a lot of themes that you were talking about. It seems like there could be a talk for each of them. I want to ask if you could maybe open up this idea of rewilding pedagogies and generative curriculum and garden as a classroom, but because you were also saying this kind of reclaiming, rewilding and reimagining these monocultures of knowledge. And I find that it's really important to talk in this context at the university, but also maybe on a more, this is more maybe wide, but on a more narrow sense, this, what you were mentioning, this maintenance, which is also something, etymologically, this is something done by hand, this material maintenance, collecting these mixed recipes, etc., working together, but also in this idea of collecting mythologies, traditions, rituals, songs, which I feel really resonates with our previous talk, where John Berger kind of ended with this idea of hope, his hopes being in song, actually. So I find it really resonating. You also said you're a very hopeful person. I'm wondering, I mean, this kind of, and I think it's really important that you are also interested in producing new songs, new mythologies. So it's something growing. It's not something that's only maintained and frozen. I was wondering how this, do you have maybe some strategies, not the right word, tactics. I know you said you don't have these plans, but I mean, some sort of way of kind of disseminating this in a different way, maybe in some open source. You just said it will be online, but you also sent us to follow an Instagram account of an artist. So I was wondering about that. And you mentioned this Jumana's work on water springs. You showed this last project on the wadis, the valleys, which are these water resources. And I remember from your longer abstract, the etymological root of the word SAKIYA, which is obviously connected with water and water infrastructure. Just wanted to ask you if you would like to say something about that. Thanks a lot. Shukran.
So much, Afwan. Yeah, I don't know where to start with there's so much, but I think that if we come to the idea of rewilding pedagogy, it came from like this understanding of the limitations of our education system in Palestine, and the need for it to be to become wild. And we thought rewilding. I think I know the problematic with the word, and we're still exploring words in Arabic and in English actually. But so because our approach to education is very different, of course we believe nature is the first educator, but we learn from each other, and we have in our groups of learning, the most learned sometimes is somebody who can't read and write. And so we're challenging a lot of ideas about who's learned or who's educated and who's not. And so this is why this idea of rewilding, because it also brings, I'm gonna bring even more ideas into this now, because we do what we call halaka, and education or pedagogy or knowledge production happens through these halakas, which means a chain. And we're meeting in chains all the time, mostly around food, but that's where a lot of our exploration and a lot of our discussion around what we know happens. And that's where also ideas for projects happen. So I think we focus more on methods and strategies rather than plans, and because plans come from these methods and strategies, but we know how we do things, and then we allow the plans to come as we do them. So we know that we have a chain that we discuss things in, and we know that we learn from each other, and we know that we believe that methods and myths hold equal weight in our projects. And so when we write our project and when we implement our project, we think about story and material are equal to each other. And we believe that, for example, human and non-human is also equal. And so, we have these basic ethics methodologies that then allow us to establish strategies, and then we go into working, and planning happens as we go. I think maybe I missed some of the things you asked me, but if there's...
I was also asking about SAKIYA, this kind of...
the name. Yeah, so every word in Arabic comes from a 3-letter root. And so SAKIYA comes from Saqaya, 3 letters. And it means to give water, or to irrigate, or or a cup bearer, so somebody who gives you tea or wine. It also means a water mill, and it's the same root for words that are used for common sharing, like crop sharing, and a stem of a mushroom. So it's also a name of a demolished Palestinian village in 1948. And the name has so many different meanings and relations that we were attracted to it. And there's a water spring in the village that's called SAKIYA that's dry today. So we chose to revive it through our work.
There was Nima. Nima,
Yeah, we're out of time. Can I ask my question or not? Because otherwise I can just send you an email. But if it's okay, I can just ask my question.
It's okay for me. So
For the other.
um,
Anyway, I will ask.
Yes,
Sorry
please.
for, we're running out of time. But thank you for your very interesting, inspiring, talks. Especially, it was very interesting for me, your talks right now about Sari and SAKIYA, because Sari is one of the most famous characters in traditional Persian poetry, because I come from Iran. So. Sorry, can you hear me right now? Probably
Yes.
my question is a bit personal, based on a similar experience that I had in Iran. We had a kind of a rural regeneration program there, which had stopped. We stopped it actually right after the coronavirus pandemic happened, because of the some financial legal issues. And as you're working in one of the most segmented territories around the world, I guess, I wanted to ask you, I was wondering what is your personal motivation that makes you continue and keep on this ongoing program and just I don't know, designing this kind of, ongoing progress or academic progress there in that territory, especially as you mentioned that it's very hard to get financial aid, and it's very hard in terms of legal issues that you have with Israeli government.
Thank you. Well, I don't want to sound cliche, but I don't think, I think every Palestinian who's in Palestine would say that, like, they're like an important part of who they are, value of life is through resisting, like feeling like you're part of something larger, that you are, that there is a larger dream for liberation that means something for everybody here, that you're part of. This is an important, like, to be part of something collectively. And the problem and why I'm working is because I have been witnessing how this collective dream has been withering or has been changing into some economic gains here and there. Like if you have a house, or if you have a car, if you have a secure job, then you get busy with it and you are in debt, and it's hard to think about liberation. And this is what has been happening in the past 20 years. The liberation dream has changed into some economic stability or security dream. And this what makes me go, this idea that we're starting to lose this connection to a larger collective dream that means something to every Palestinian, but also that these struggles are global. And I said this before, but feeling part of a global struggle, there is so much destruction and injustices in the world, and feeling like you are part of challenging that is very important. I think that I feel very closely connected to liberation movements and environmental rights and women rights, sexual rights everywhere in the world. So we're talking about in general, like feeling like the collectively we have been forced into certain ways of we've been collapsed into some labor to work for certain powers. And I think that, you know, this connects everybody. And I don't know, that's what keeps me going. I think, I don't know if that makes sense, but like, it's truly like through this piece of land that I feel like all of this could happen. And I think that we all can feel like through one project that like this is where you're being able to not feel like you have been co-opted by all of this mess that we're living in. Like, how can we get out of this? And I feel like through being at SAKIYA and working in the land.
Wonderful final words, and I think very, very, I would say also kind of provocative or thought-provoking. I mean, we have, for instance, currently a studio project called the Zurich Beyond the Urban-Rural Divide, where we go out into the, let's say, farming land and really look at the problems of the farmers. And believe it or not, even in a rich country, let's say, agriculture is also a kind of a frontier of I would say, certain kinds of encroachment on you know, the kind of family structures on the land, on the water sources, on, to say so, the non-human and so on. So I think it's. However, the stories, the issues are very specific, and one of the and there are I mean, many among us, the other studios working on kind of agroecological projects in the same context. You got a question from Amin and Nima. They're working on solidarity agriculture initiatives, let's say, around Zurich. There is a lot of, let's say, energy and people experimenting and really coming up with incredible knowledges. Perhaps that links to your idea of rewilding pedagogies, but there is I see less perhaps of the kind of you know, wider conversation where possibilities of such exchanges to be made, you know. So let's say if this notion of rewilding pedagogies could bring us together in a kind of exchange that is cross-cultural or let's say, you know, also translocal and so on, where we would learn from each other, I think it would be extremely generative like it was today, you know. So I hope to keep in touch and to realize this idea of meeting in person and doing something together. Now that we know you, we can come up with the kind of idea of a collaborative, let's say, session or a workshop or something like that. And I hope we can do that in the near future. So thank you all. Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Stefanie, and thank you, Federico. We owe you all a wonderful dinner together, and we won't forget it. So. So hope we'll be back about that in a short while. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, Sahar, for such inspiration.
Thank you so much, everyone. Incredible questions. Thank you so much. I'm gonna keep these questions with me, and I hope to stay in touch with everybody. Please feel free to share my email if anybody is interested in writing, and if you ever find yourselves in Ramallah or would like to be here, let me know. I would love to invite you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
All the best.